Hello everybody! This video will show you how to make a scarf on the Zippy Loom using the figure 8 stitch. It's a fast project that will give you a beautiful and thick handmade scarf. During this tutorial, we are going to, number 1, cast on and then tighten it right away. Number 2, do lots of figure 8 stitches. And number 3, we'll bind off with our fingers. For the supplies, you will need 4 Zippy Looms that are arranged in 2 rows, 2 balls of yarn, I used Red Heart Grande, a short piece of scrap yarn for your anchor yarn, and you'll also need a hook, a pair of scissors, and a yarn needle. We'll begin with a slip knot. You'll make a loop in your left hand and hold the tail in your right. With your left hand, grab some yarn from your right and pull it through the loop. There's no need for a long tail. You'll put it on the top left peg, which we will never knit with, and we're only using it for the slip knot. Next, we'll start with figure 8s like this, moving from top peg to bottom peg, just like a figure 8. We're going to be using the 6 pegs across the top for our figure 8s and the 6 pegs across the bottom, so we'll be mostly ignoring those end pegs. At the last set of pegs, your yarn is in a straight line in the inside of the pegs. This is important to remember. So before you rewrap now each peg, you can push down the bottom loop to make a bit of room. So we are just backtracking. We are retracing our steps by putting new figure 8s right over the old figure 8s. Now at the last set of pegs, remember that we're going to do a straight line. This time we're going to hold it a bit tight so that we can knit over that bottom loop, and that will lock the working yarn in place. So we're going to continue knitting over those bottom loops which are across the top row of pegs. We'll move on to the bottom row. Now, the one on the very right is empty, and that's totally normal. That's to be expected. So we'll just knit over the bottom loops of those 5 pegs on the bottom row. Okay, so we're going to be removing the slack. So look at the different knots in the middle, those different bumps in the middle between those 2 rows. We're going to be pulling them, and we're going to be pulling them from the left side, one by one. So we have a top bump, we're going to go to the bottom, always pulling from the left side. We're going to do this until we reach the other side. So I just want to do a shout out to the 2 YouTubers who gave me this idea of removing the slack after doing the cast on. One is Kimberly Kerrigan, and the video is called Double Loom Knit Tight Cast On. And one is from Sindwood Crafts, and it's called Figure 8 Cast On Tips. So I'd like to thank those 2 YouTubers. So at the last set, things might get a bit messy, but what to note is that as it gets a bit confusing in this particular area, what you need to do is remove the slip knot from that peg, from that very first peg, and you're going to tighten that up. You're going to move that towards the left, and that's going to remove the slack, and then things will start looking like they should. You're going to make a knot. So I've got my working yarn in my left hand, and I have my slip knot end on the right, and I'm going to make just a simple knot for some extra security. So by leaving the slip knot tail like this, I won't have to weave it in later. So now I'm grabbing my anchor yarn, and I'm going to lay that across the loom, and I'm going to stick in the ends through the hole in the middle. And that's going to help me pull down the scarf as I make progress. So now that the cast on is completely done, let's go back to the figure 8s. We are putting new figure eights right over top of the old figure eights. We're basically doing the same moves that we were doing during the cast on row. So again, at the last set of pegs, you're going to be making a straight line with your yarn, and then you're going to be holding it tight a bit. And that is so you can knit over that bottom loop. So you're going to use your hook and those grooves to help. And you're going to knit over the bottom loops of that bottom row. Now, then you're going to knit over the loops on the top row. Now, as an exception, here you see that you have 6 loops to knit over. Usually we're going to find only 5. This is an exception because we did something a bit special with the cast on row. But in the future, you'll notice that there will only be 5. Here I'm pushing down all of the loops. You can either push them down as you wrap one by one, or you can do them all at once. It's really up to you. So I'm starting my figure eights again. So again, I'm backtracking. I'm putting new figure eights over the old figure eights. And then I'm doing that straight line thing again. And I'm going to hold the working yarn a bit tight. And then I'm going to knit over. And I'm going to be knitting over then those 6 loops on the top row. And then I should find only 5 on the bottom row. So I'm going to knit those over using the hook and the grooves. And I'm going to push everything down to make room for some new loops. I might tug on the anchor yarn a bit to see if that helps. But the scarf isn't long enough yet to be poking out. And I'm going to continue with my figure eights. So another thing that I wanted to mention is that it's always a good idea to do a swatch first. Doing a swatch, well, doing a few swatches helped me with the cast on row to figure that out. And it also helped me bind off so that I was able to bind off and keep that top edge, even and nice, and have it kind of match the cast on row as well. I find that the cast on part and the binding off part are the trickiest parts. I think the figure eight stuff in the middle is pretty doable. So practicing with a swatch is very helpful. And it's also very good because you can see how your particular yarn is going to work with this stitch and on that particular loom. So I can see here that it's a jumbo number 7 yarn that I'm using. I like it very much. It is kind of loose and airy, but for me, I like that. If you want to do something with a tighter weave, then you might try a stockinette stitch, for example, and that means that you just won't be doing these twists of the figure eight. So swatches are really important before you embark on a new project. I think the other thing I wanted to mention is that since I'm using Red Heart Grande, I did need 2 balls of yarn for this project. I noticed that Red Heart Grande, that the length of the yarn is actually quite short. It was only 42 meters, and I'm not sure how many yards it was. So I did need to use 2 balls of yarn. Maybe if you're using a different brand, you'll only need 1. So I think you can continue your figure eights. And since I ran out of yarn halfway through, we'll meet back again and I'll show you how I added the second ball of yarn. So now I'm going to show you how to add your second ball of yarn. So here I've run out of yarn. You can see my original yarn in my left hand, the new ball is in my right, and then I'm tying a knot by doing a right over left, and then a left over right. Okay, so I'm going to tighten that up. So I'm going to pull it to make sure it's nice and tight. And then I'm going to grab some yarn towards the middle. And just for some extra security, I'm going to tie another knot. I'm doing a right over left and a left over right. Okay, so I'm going to tighten that. Then you can either cut off those tails or you can just leave them there. And you will start knitting again just as usual. So I also want to show you a second way to add yarn. It's a simpler way. So in this second way, you'll just tie a knot, just like the first way. So you do a right over left and then a left over right, and then you're going to make sure it's very tight. And then afterwards, you're just going to cut off the tails. And then that way you won't need to weave anything in later. And then you just go on knitting as you were doing before. So that's also another option. So you can keep knitting on your own with your second ball of yarn, and we'll meet later to bind off together. So we're now going to remove the project from the loom. So we are binding off together. So we're going to take the top loop in the top right corner, and we're going to get the loop on the bottom peg as well. And we're going to have them sort of facing left. We're going to put the top loop inside the bottom loop, and then we're going to pull that upwards. Then we're going to take the loop on the next peg at the top, and we'll put that through the loop. And we will pull that upwards as well, and you can see how it's sort of facing left. Then you're going to take the loop off the next bottom peg, put it through the loop. You're going to pull that upwards, get the next loop off of the next top peg, and then you'll put it through the loop, and you'll also pull that upwards. Next is the loop on the bottom peg. So you'll put that through and then tug it upwards, and again, you're sort of facing the left each time. And then you're going to continue doing this loop by loop until you have reached the left side. And this is going to create for you a really nice braided edge. Now, when you have one loop left, you're going to put that tail through it, and then you're just going to tighten it to tie a knot. And here we can see that nice braided edge, and we're going to pull the scarf downwards to remove it from the loom. And next, we're going to have to weave in the tail. So you can use your fingers or a yarn needle. I'm weaving my tail through the top, and then I'm going to go downwards. Okay, I think it's looking very nice. I'm going to find the cast on edge from before. So the loops are already tight since we had taken out the extra yarn. So now we need to just pull out that anchor yarn, and we're also going to cut off that slipknot tail, and the scarf is done. So I hope you like making this figure 8 stitch scarf on the Zippy Loom, and you can like, comment, or subscribe to Ms. Yarn.